And we're back on the Zero Hour. I, as always, am your host, Richard RJ Eskow. Over the years, I've relied on the Economic Policy Institute a great deal, both in my writing, and we've had a number of guests from EPI on this program as well. They are leaders in exploring the American economy in terms of labor and inequality. My next guest has been on the program before, but not for some time. Heidi Shierholz, that's spelled Shierholz, is a labor economist. She also spent time as the chief economist for the Department of Labor under President Obama, and she has just been named the new head of EPI. So I thought this would be a great time to catch up with her and see what her thoughts are about EPI, the labor economy, and where we're all going and all of this. So without any further ado, Heidi Shierholz, thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a wonderful time to be here.
And congratulations on your new position. I think that's very exciting and a great choice. So I was delighted to hear about it.
Thank you. What I've been saying is I've worked at EPI since 2007. Over the last 14 years, I've just had extraordinary opportunities to contribute to the organization. I could not be more thrilled to be able to contribute at this level, at this time, at this moment in time in our economy. It's just an extraordinary. I just couldn't be more thrilled.
Well, why don't we start with that then? Why don't we start with this moment in time? Because what a moment it is, right? I mean, here we're dealing with the second major economic shock in 12, 13 years, which is the pandemic crisis, following the 2008 financial crisis, the labor market. I think, let me start with a global impression, and then you tell me where I'm right or wrong. First of all, particularly if we're talking about the economy of working America, it seems to me that we're sort of dangling over a precipice saying this is fine, kind of it could have been worse, it's kind of okay, but in fact, the unemployment numbers, at least the top line numbers, are going down and so on. But there's a little bit of wage growth, I guess. But on the other hand, it seems to me I'm mixing metaphors now, this Damoclean sword over our heads of, the eviction moratorium is going to end, the foreclosure moratorium is going to end, people are going to owe a lot of back rent and house payments, people are going to Delta variant. Now there's some whispering they're watching the Mu variant, and I just feel as if when I read the mainstream media, it's all, well, things are pretty good, but I have a feeling we're at high risk here. But is my impression off base, or what do you think?
No, I think your impression is right on. And just the backdrop is there is so much uncertainty still. Over the last year and a half, we've never faced the kind of uncertainty that we've faced in terms of outlook. That's still true with Delta, with other variants coming. It's just there is enormous uncertainty. But what we know right now is that we're still in a huge hole. The hole in the labor market is on the order of 8 million jobs. The unemployment rate is coming down. And that's another key point. Things are improving in the labor market. And we can talk about, there's been a recent slowdown as a result of Delta. But if you look over the long haul, things are improving. And over the last 6 months, they've been improving really fast. And that's great. But we don't have any security that that's for sure going to last because of things like Delta and other variants. And we still have this giant hole. And I mean, just to talk about the unemployment rate, right now it is at 5.2%,
right?
Which actually sounds, I mean, we still have a long way to go. Before the COVID recession, it got down to 3.5%. I think we could go even lower. So it's still super elevated if you're just looking at the unemployment rate. But the unemployment rate is masking huge slack in the labor market. And one thing is, the unemployment rate always masks slack in the labor market, especially after recessions, but it is doing it more than ever now. If you count people who have dropped out of the labor force, but would, as a result of COVID, the unemployment rate is closer to 8% right now. So it is a scary, we are in steadily improving, but a lot of uncertainty. And so we're in a precarious moment. The idea that we are pulling back on these pandemic provisions is terrible economics. It's not a good idea right now.
And you're referring, among other things, to the ending of supplemental unemployment insurance benefits, right? And, there's another dimension to this, too, which I think of even in, reported good times as well as perilous times, which is, it seems to me we don't sufficiently talk about the quality of jobs that people have. I mean, I saw a report recently saying that 1 in 3 working people now has some variant of a gig economy job without the benefits that with little or no benefits, as opposed to the kinds of jobs we used to have. Jobs have shifted since 2008. And again, always feel free to correct me if I'm citing wrong statistics, but my understanding is 2008 jobs have shifted much more to the service sector, lower paying. And so I feel as if, and I say this with absolute respect to working people with lousy jobs because I've had my share of them in my life, but it's like, hey, hooray, let's celebrate. We're going back to work in our crappy jobs, which is basically, a sort of dereliction of our duty as people as a society. It's like, not only should people be working, but I feel they should be fairly compensated at their work, and it should be decent work. And so I feel as if that's a measurement we don't even have. We have U5, U4, U6, but I feel as if we don't even have anything that measures that kind of qualitative weakness in jobs or the underemployment. Certainly we try to measure that, but you get what I'm driving at, right? I mean, even for working people, a lot of working people, this is not a great job existence, is it?
Right. No, that's a really good point. There are two different concepts. And it's like, do we have enough jobs? That's one thing, but it is not even close to the full story of what people need to make ends meet. They need to actually have a decent job. And so that's an extremely important point. I would put the erosion of job quality, wage stagnation for working people at going way farther back than just after the Great Recession. We saw the roots of this, of the sort of the path that has led us to this place where we have just a huge swath of our labor market working in jobs that are pretty low quality on the basis of wages, benefits, working conditions, hours. That really did start 4 decades ago. We've seen this long run of policy choices all over the map that have really kind of shifted economic leverage away from workers towards their employers. One of the things we're seeing now, which is interesting, is in some isolated sectors, we're seeing strong wage growth. There is this, it's not as pervasive as what the sort of public conversation about it is, but in isolated sectors, particularly in leisure and hospitality, which is where hotels and restaurants are, we are actually seeing pockets of very tight labor markets, and they have come along with decent wage growth for these workers. And so we are seeing this interesting dynamic take place. I've been asked a lot about what's causing this and will it last? And I think the thing that is causing this, it's there a lot of people have speculated it's been the unemployment insurance, the additional unemployment insurance benefits. When you dig into the data, you actually don't find that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it is. You don't see that at the macro level that is keeping people out of work en masse. There's been a lot of research looking at it. It does have some effect at the micro level, like it will reduce employment a little bit amongst individual workers. It's actually not necessarily a bad thing, right? Like
Right.
one of the features of unemployment insurance is that you have a little bit of wiggle room to find a job that's a good match for your skills and experience. You don't have to take the first thing that comes around. So a little bit of an employment effect is actually the kind of thing we want to see. We are seeing that now. But if you look at the overall effect, it does not have a negative job impact because there's offsetting really positive effects of people who have unemployment insurance have money to spend in the economy, and that actually generates more jobs. So overall, it is not hurting. It is actually helping our economy. So it's not that unemployment insurance is keeping people out of the labor market en masse. I think the thing that has created these labor shortages, isolated labor shortages, not widespread, but definitely in some sectors, and strong wage growth, is just the fact of we had this spectacular, in the worst sense, job loss. And now we're actually seeing extremely strong growth, with the most recent month is an exception because we started to see Delta take over. But before that, like the prior month, 1 million jobs added, just huge growth. And when that kind of labor market is in that kind of flux, there will be pockets where workers just are able to, because of that, these enormous sort of upheavals that are going on, that there's been some workers in some pockets of the economy who actually been able to seize some economic leverage that they didn't have before. But I do not really see anything in what's going on now that would make me think that it's going to be a lasting phenomenon. I think the thing that has suppressed wages over the last 4 decades has just been policy choice after policy choice after policy choice that has, minimum wage changes or through commission or omission that actually make it harder for workers to join unions, and on and on and on. These few months of some workers, because of enormous flux in the labor market, these few months of some workers being able to actually eke out some real economic leverage, is not going to undo those 4 decades of policy choices, unless it really does somehow spur a whole bunch of policy changes. It really is going to take the organizing and the policy changes to make to have this lead, in my view, to lasting strong wage growth instead of just a blip, which I think it's possible we'll look back 10 years from now and the wage growth we're seeing now will have been just a blip unless we get good policy changes.
And that's such an important point, Heidi Shierholz. I mean, I think that it's so important for people to understand that the mainstream media may tout it as a big deal, but we're talking about people who have been struggling economically for decades, and as you say, a blip does not change the fundamental decisions we've made that have caused that difficulty. And there's a related, since I've mentioned the mainstream media, there's another point I wanted to raise with you, which is I've seen even in the best newspapers these sort of incredulous, best quote unquote, the most respected. I've seen these headlines that express utter bafflement at the fact that we have so many unfilled jobs at the same time that there's still, a lot of unemployed people out there, either in the employment numbers or not in the workforce. And they're scratching their heads in utter puzzlement as to why this is, when I think anybody who's taken an undergrad introduction to economics course would say, others made this point too, would say, well, you got to pay them more. Pay them more, they'll come. Particularly in the middle of a pandemic, they don't want to be out there. They're afraid of, understandably cautious about COVID. So if you're not paying them enough to offset that reluctance, they're not going to come. But it's almost as if the discourse, I hate to use that overused word, but it's almost as if the discourse hasn't imbibed what strikes me as a fundamental principle, and is therefore just assuming, well, coming up with complex theories. Am I oversimplifying the situation?
No, it does seem to be there is this, it's for some reason this seems to be something that's difficult for people to get. Like I do think that you have put your finger on something that's real and a sort of misunderstanding of what should be what it means to have a bunch of labor or well, a bunch of job openings go unfilled. So for example, one of the things that I often say is when you hear an employer complaining about not being able to find the workers that they need, always in your head add the phrase at the wage I want to pay. Like we do know for sure that in a vast majority of these cases, if employers really would just raise wages, they would be able to find the workers that they need. They would be able to fill those jobs. There's some cases where there are absolutely bona fide labor shortages where that's not possible,
Sure.
but those are few and far between. It's like, if you'll pay enough, you can find something that's really scarce, right? Like you see this and people get it intuitively when you're talking about goods, right? Like there's
Right.
a lumber shortage. It's hard to find lumber. If you pay enough, you'll be able to get it. Like that somehow locks in a really intuitive place in people's minds. We need to make sure that that same kind of logic, people get it when they're talking about not commodities, but people, labor, people who are in jobs. So it is that is something that once you talk it through the way we're doing, then it makes perfect sense and you get it. And like if employers really are leaving like production or whatever, they're leaving something on the table there that's going unfilled because they can't find the workers that they need, they will raise those wages to get workers to fill those jobs. So, and it's not that everyone will be able to instantaneously fill jobs, and we're seeing that now when employers are trying to hire back millions of workers to fill jobs that they let go in the worst of the pandemic. It doesn't happen immediately. You still have to post jobs, bring people in, interview them, make offers, like do that, like all this stuff
Right.
actually takes some time. It's not instantaneous, but with decent wages, you can get people on board. And so that is a very, very important sort of missing or de-emphasized part of this
Right.
discussion.
And cynic that I am, sometimes I think that lack of emphasis is, well, cui bono, who benefits from it, as a business community at large does. But, and by the way, I just want to reiterate before we go on that you made such an important point earlier, which is that people think about something like unemployment benefits as keeping people out of the workforce, but they don't think about the job creation dimension of something like unemployment benefits, which goes to people, I would assume, largely who have pent-up demand, as opposed to, let's say, even an upper middle class tax break or something. People may already be saving, as much as they can, but somebody who's been, earning very little and now is unemployed, you give them $300 a week extra or whatever, they'll spend it, right? And
Totally.
their
Yeah.
spending it will create jobs wherever they go to spend that money. So I just didn't want that to be overlooked. And one thing that I know you've studied a lot at EPI, and I assume will continue to study, is in terms of wage. We've heard a lot about how, and you guys have published a lot about how wage growth has failed to keep up with productivity growth. And grim analogy, but I always picture the Challenger where one part kept going up and then another it kind of flatlined and started to fall. That's productivity and wages, with the difference going to employers primarily and to, not to working people. So people are getting less, even though they're producing more, and or certainly not getting more, to be more precise. And I guess one of the main factors in that is EPI has pointed out, is the decline in union membership. So if that's the case, and what's private sector union membership now, 6% or something?
Mhm.
So it's way down, and certainly way down from when I was a kid. And yet we have a Gallup poll showing that unions are more popular now than they've been at least 30 or 40 years of polling. So where does this leave us? It strikes me that we're in a kind of moment of opportunity to reinvigorate the union movement. But am I being too Pollyannish by saying that?
No, you bring up really good points. Like we do know that the increasing inequality and the wage stagnation for most people over most of the last 40 years, a key driver of that has been the decline of unionization. Full stop. Like that we know to be true. One of the myths that you have to that come up in this is this myth that people don't want to be in unions, that like what we already have the 40-hour work week, and it's not the terrible conditions that you saw in the early part of the 1900s where people were more flocking into union. That is a total myth. And you brought this up. Like there was a Gallup poll that came out yesterday. I'm not going to get the exact right numbers, but just a huge majority of people saying they support unions. There's been surveys that have been done on a regular basis asking non-unionized people if they would vote for a union in their workplace. And that's actually a higher percentage now than it was 40 years ago. People want to be in unions, but there is this massive disconnect between the share of people who want to be in a union and the share of people who are
Yeah.
actually in a union. And that disconnect is about policy. It is
Right.
about policy changes that have steadily policy changes, or I said this before, by omission or commission, active policy changes that have made it harder or in some ways undermine people's fundamental right to unionize, like active policy choices or policy labor law just not keeping up with the changing employer practices that have undermined people's right to unionize and their ability to be in unions, to join together with their coworkers to demand better wages, working conditions. So that it is a policy choice, which is actually in many ways a very positive finding, because we can halt and reverse these trends. We actually can make a different choice. And I do think there is growing understanding about this and a real growing desire to have things be different, to make different policy choices in the broader population. And then it comes down to, okay, what do we have to do to actually see the change happen? We have right now this really extraordinary window of policy opportunity at the federal level. Obviously,
Right.
there have been many states where there's been policy opportunities, but at the federal level, there is a pro-worker, ambitious administration in place. There are slim pro-worker majorities in both houses of Congress. Like there is a time here when we could actually see some really transformative change. But it so there's this like glimmer of a window of hope. It will take a lot to actually have that be manifested. So it is, but there is an extraordinary time right now where we could see some transformative change, some actual fundamental reform that could make it easier for workers to join a union. So I really hope that it's absolutely essential that it actually happen.
Yeah, I'm not. I wish I were seeing more energy around this. And this isn't meant as a criticism of anyone politically, but right now, obviously, Washington is struggling with the infrastructure bill and the reconciliation bill, and that's consuming a lot of energy. But one hopes that, for example, the infrastructure bill will produce a lot of jobs, and that the administration will make sure that those are good-paying union jobs. And we had a decision today, Thursday, as we record, that I haven't had a chance to read closely yet, but apparently the administration is going to set some standards for contractors as well as federal employees and so on in terms of wages. So maybe you guys were involved in drafting that. I don't know, but so I'm hopeful, but I do think it's so critical. And sometimes Heidi Shierholz, when I think about labor organizing, I almost picture like three overlapping circles, a Venn diagram, kind of like the Olympic logo or something, with one being policy and one being union leadership and organizing and structure and so on, and the third being the rank and file. And it seems like in that third circle, we have this pent up demand, or what could be turned into demand as latent energy. And I think the union leadership would like to see that, but I feel as if somehow the three have to move in concert to change things. Do you get what I'm driving at?
Yeah, I really do. Like I'm glad that you clarified that, because this idea that ultimately what we like a legislative change here is absolutely crucial. I believe we are not going to see the kind of increase in unionization that even if we have the most energized rank and file, the most energized union leadership, which I 100% agree with you that the energy is enormous right now, the actual landscape for doing organizing is so stacked against organizing that we just won't see the kind of increase in unionization that we would really need to see to halt and reverse the trends of rising inequality and wage stagnation for most people. So I really require that legislative change, but that legislative change won't happen without these other things in place. Like it absolutely takes this groundswell, this pressure, this like consensus of what is done to get the policy change to happen. In like that, and that groundwork is really strongly there right now. The policy situation is really precarious, but it does seem like we might be in a place where we have all three of those things set up in a way that it could happen. It's absolutely crucial that it does.
It is absolutely critical. And Heidi Shierholz, that gets me back to EPI, to Economic Policy Institute, because it seems to me you're ideally positioned to have an even bigger impact going forward, not only in the policy area as a kind of go-to resource, but in the commission case to help others, help people like me, as you've done over the years, make the case for better policies towards labor. And in some way, if we can inject more of this into the mainstream consciousness, to get people to, I'm trying to articulate this the right way, but to get people to understand not only that they want this, but that they can have it, and that it can concretely help their lives. And that, how success builds on success and hope builds on hope. And if you think, even in my own industry of journalism, where we had some organizing successes, and very exciting to win, right? That's going to be hard to create that feeling without more momentum across the labor force. But if we can get people to understand that it's doable, that there are people trying to help them make it happen, that they can play a part in it, and that here's what could happen. It seems to me, if it's done, it seems to me that API is really well positioned, not only to be a policy resource as important as that is, but to shift the dialogue a bit.
I couldn't agree more. I think that there is a real push amongst people who are opposed to change, people who have been on the winning end of the rising inequality that we've seen over the last 4 decades. There's a real push to make it seem like the dynamics that we have experienced, they're just the outgrowth of a modern economy. There's nothing we could, there's nothing we could do about them. There's nothing we'd really want to do about them because we don't want to set ourselves back, right? That idea is really, really something that pushed so strongly by people who don't want these dynamics of rising inequality to change because they're benefiting from them. And so this narrative that this is just this, it may be unfortunate, we don't really like inequality, but this is just how it has to be, is strong. Like it's been a pretty pervasive narrative amongst like sort of across the board, but I think it's breaking down. People are starting to get that this is a choice. It doesn't have to be this way. Yeah, this is just how it has been like used to try to put down any kinds of change. So I do think that there is this real shift that has happened, but there's resistance to it. And so groups like EPI and many others in the sort of broader infrastructure as working around these things just have to keep up that drumbeat of here's what the dynamics are we've been seeing over the last 4 decades and beyond. Here is what has been causing them. And all that adds up to we can make a difference. We do not have to have the kind of dynamics in our economy that we have seen. So it's an exciting time, but it does feel like there is this, it does feel like there's this opportunity right now that might not last. So we really want to grab it.
That's such a, before I let you go, if you have another second, any exciting research projects coming up you can talk about, or is it premature?
There's so much. One of the things I'm really excited about just staying in like keeping with the discussion about unions and unionization, one of the things that we'll be focusing on more is the importance of unions to racial justice, which I think is something that just is not well understood. Many people think about unions and they think about an older white guy who's in and it could be that demographic was the way many unions, the demographic that made up a huge part of unions in the beginning. But now, where we are now, unions totally reflect the diversity of our broader economy. And in fact, Black workers, for example, are more likely to be in unions than white workers. And also, all workers get a big boost from being in a union. Workers who are in a union, they have better pay, benefits, working conditions than similar workers who aren't in a union. That's true across the board, but that effect is stronger for Black workers than white workers because there's so much more stacked against people of color. So when you put those things together, unions actually make a big dent in the Black-white wage gap. And so the erosion of unions has actually been a huge contributor to the increase in the Black-white wage gap over the last 4 decades. Like the other thing that this all points to is the expansion of unionization that we saw in the mid-20th century was an incredibly important force for racial justice. And then the decline of that has been an incredibly impactful in a terrible way force in the other direction. So it is a very complicated but incredibly important story that I think I really think it's that story, and it's not a story, right? Like that truth is not something that's in the broader consciousness. And so we'll have a few products coming out that will really highlight that fact.
I don't think it's even in the left consciousness because I talk to a lot of people when I talk about trying to reinvigorate the union movement. A lot of people on the left will say to me, well, yeah, that was fine for white folks in the 50s and 60s. That was fine for your family. I think a lot of people don't get what unions have done and could still do in this area. And the only thing I might add to that, I'm sorry, no, I'm keeping you long, but is given that we have not yet succeeded in integrating neighborhoods, as Richard Rothstein's work and others have shown, I would think that reinvigorating unions would, while reducing that black wealth gap, would also help reinvigorate the communities where black workers live,
Mm-hmm.
and would, so I think it benefits black workers and black communities in ways that I think most people probably don't perceive.
I absolutely agree. I think it is a very, very not well understood, but huge force that if we were able to increase unionization, it would just unionization broadly, it would have this really important disproportionate effect to elevate Black communities.
Well, Heidi Shierholz, I've kept you much longer than I promised to, and I know you're extremely busy, so I apologize for that. But it's been a great pleasure. I hope you'll come back and speak to us again, and maybe even about my pet union subject, which is sectoral bargaining. But I know you have much to do. So once again, Heidi Shierholz is your official title president or executive director?
Presidents.
President, even better, of the Economic Policy Institute. So congratulations again, and thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks so much. It was an absolute delight.
Same here. And we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour.